Hello, everyone, and welcome into Senior Living Live. My name is Melissa. We appreciate you being here for our very first webinar of 2022. We're already there, if you can already believe it. I hope you all enjoy the holidays. Today, we are talking about an important topic that doesn't get discussed very often, and that is driving. We all take that for granted, right? The ability to do that. Now, the question of the topic today, is it safe for my elderly parents or spouse to drive? It can be a tough discussion to have with your loved one who may feel like driving is a huge part of what makes them independent. Our guest today, Matt Gurwell, he is here, years of experience on what he has seen in the field when it comes to senior drivers, and he's got some excellent tips to help you start that conversation the right way. Now, Matt will be here to answer all of your questions at the end of his presentation. All you have to do to participate is scroll down to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A. You can type your questions out there, and I will be happy to read those to Matt at the end of his presentation, which we expect this whole webinar will last about an hour. So Matt, we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, to share your knowledge with our viewers and to answer questions. The webinar is all yours.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much to the Arbor Company for inviting me here today to talk, as Melissa said, about a very important topic. This particular presentation is titled Adults with Aging Parent Drivers, and it's meant for adult children with aging parent drivers. I like to say I thought that title up myself. And it is about an hour long, and we're going to talk about what to do if you suspect an aging parent is starting to slip a little bit, either in their cognitive abilities, driving abilities, or their physical abilities, or in some cases both. So hopefully this is going to help you decide if there truly is an issue, and if so, what types of things can we do about it. Just by way of introduction, geographically, I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and I am the Beyond Driving with Dignity program director for Senior Care Authority. Senior Care Authority is the only organization in the country that offers this Beyond Driving with Dignity program. So I'm very delighted to be a part of their fine organization. Prior to that, I spent my career as an Ohio State trooper. And I worked my way up through the ranks and became an administrator in the Highway Patrol by the time I retired. And I saw that it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, but I saw that there was a serious void in the system, so to speak, on what we do as a society with older drivers that maybe shouldn't be driving. And I don't want to just make the blanket statement that this is applicable to all older drivers, because it's not. Many of them, most of them, in fact, are still excellent drivers and probably will be for years to come, hopefully. But I think we'd all agree there is a component of the population of older drivers that, again, have lost some of their abilities to remain safe behind the wheel. And oftentimes, no one wants to be the person or the organization or the profession to have that conversation with the older driver. So when I retired from the Ohio State Highway Patrol, I developed this Beyond Driving with Dignity program, which I said now over the course of several years has been completely adopted by Senior Care Authority. And we'll talk more at the end on how you can reach out to us at Senior Care Authority to access some of the services that we offer. So that's an introduction. That was wordier than I meant it to be. So let's get started, please. First, I like to say that every good PowerPoint presentation needs a couple of boring statistics at the start. Although I will say, I don't think this is boring at all. It's extremely relevant. But in a two-vehicle crash nationally, in a two-vehicle fatal crash where two vehicles run into each other and someone is killed, if one or the other of the drivers is 70 or older, that person is 3.5 times more likely to be the one killed in the crash. So when we talk to groups of older drivers, and we do have a presentation unique for them, I explained to them that, look, you could be the best driver on the road, but you're 80-something years old. If a younger driver runs a stop sign and hits you and somebody's killed in that crash, there's a 3.5 times better chance it's you that's killed just because of your age. And notice this statistic has absolutely nothing in the world to do with who was wrong in the accident. So again, this could be the best driver on the road, but because of their age, they're more susceptible to being killed in this car accident. As a trooper, I've been to so many accidents where an older adult was killed, and you would look at the cars and think to yourself or say to yourself, it doesn't even look like anybody should have been hurt out of this accident, never mind killed. So I've seen this statistic present itself in real life. Here is I say it's cut and pasted from the internet, so you know it's true. But it is true. And this was the headline in a Pennsylvania newspaper: elderly neighbors killed in crash. And this isn't the best picture quality. I understand that, and I apologize for that, but it is a real picture of this particular accident. And if you just look at the bolded points, 2 elderly women were killed when this younger driver, 24-year-old Mr. Hetton, drove left to center and hit their car head on. The 74-year-old driver was killed at the scene, and the 83-year-old passenger died a short time later. And I share this with you because it is perfectly representative of the statistic we just talked about. Here are these older ladies driving down the road, neighbors, minding their own business, may very well have been the best driver. They certainly weren't the worst. But they may have been the best driver on the road that day. And a younger driver drives his vehicle left to center and hits those. And just exactly as the statistic would suggest, it's the 2 older adults that are killed in the accident. And just so you know, to dig a tiny bit deeper into that, there's all sorts of reasons for that, all sorts of existing medical issues, etc. But primarily it's because of their frailty. You know, for all of us, we become more frail as we age. That's just the nature of the human body. And that's why this statistic is true. Okay. What types of things can an older driver do to continue driving safely? How many of you on this webinar today, and unfortunately we're not in the same room together, so I can't see who's raising their hands, but how many of you have, as an adult child, suggested to mom or dad that they only drive on familiar roads? And I'm guessing that many of you have raised your hand. How many have said, Dad, why don't you only drive shorter distances? The next time you want to go see your brother in Tampa, Florida, we'll drive you, or we'll fly you, or we'll make some other arrangements, but don't take that trip anymore. How many have suggested to mom that she drive on less traveled roads or during the daylight? Mom, don't drive anymore at nighttime. And of course, who suggested that they avoid rush hour traffic and bad weather driving? And by now, probably the most of you have raised your hand at least once, if not all of these times. And these are, I want to say this, these are excellent tips, but only in as much as they can extend a safe driving career, but not indefinitely. There's a shelf life to the value of these suggestions. They're not good forever because of how the aging process works. Our minds slow down, our memory slips, our physical abilities slow for sure. We weaken. So these are great tips to help an older driver extend their safe driving career, but not indefinitely. There will still come a point in time where it's time for that individual to retire from driving. NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, says that on average, Americans are now outliving their safe driving years by 7 to 10 years. So the good news is we're living much longer, but the bad news is, if you want to call it bad news, the less good news is our driving skills aren't keeping up with that. So again, all of us can expect the day where we simply outlive our safe driving years. I went to high school with a fellow named John. We'll call him John Smith. His first name was John, but his last name wasn't Smith, but we'll disguise his name. He was John Smith for purposes of this story. And John and I, again, went to the same high school together. And I noticed as we got up in our 10th, 11th, 12th grades, that John couldn't be involved in any extracurricular activities. He couldn't play football. He couldn't play baseball. He couldn't be in the band. He couldn't wrestle. He couldn't do any of that stuff because when the bell rang at the end of the day at 3 o'clock, John had to get home and help with the farming operation. He lived with his family, of course, his parents and a brother and a sister on a farm in very rural Northwest Ohio, which is where I'm from. And so John and I, we miraculously both graduated from high school, and we went our own directions. And as the years went on, John and his two siblings kind of were taking over the farm operation. And by now, when the time of this story, John's parents in their upper 80s had completely retired from farming. They simply couldn't do it anymore. And John and his brother and his sister had taken over the farming operation. But what Mr. and Mrs. Smith liked to do was every morning, they still lived in what I refer to as the mother house. But every morning they liked to leave, get in the car, drive basically just around their property along on the roads, but on the outskirts of their property, checking on whatever retired farmers in Northwest Ohio check on. I suspect ditch rows, fence lines, cattle, crops, all of those things. And it was something they enjoyed doing. On occasion, they would stop in and see the son or see the daughter and visit with them and their grandkids and things like that. But they would always make that same loop around the property and come back home. And that was pretty much the extent of their driving. And they had done this for years. On this particular morning, it was a Saturday morning, they did exactly what I described. They left home together, drove around the outskirts of the homestead, and were coming back home. And the way the intersection worked here, it was just a crossing intersection of two desolate farm roads out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There was no, obviously, you can see from the this isn't their house, but you can see that it was a very rural area, farm country, Ohio farm country. And so the way the intersection worked, again, it was a crossing intersection. So when they came back, they would have to stop for the stop sign out in front of their house, basically, and then look left and right. And when it was clear to cross, they would cross the road and almost immediately then turn right into their driveway. So their home was actually in one of the corners of this intersection. I'm trying to describe it to you, and I don't feel like I'm doing a good job of that. But they did that this particular morning. They stopped for the stop sign. They're coming back home from their little walkabout. Look left, look right, pull out. Crossing traffic did not have to stop on this other farm road, but they got hit by a crossing dump truck. Somehow they didn't see it, or they misgauged its distance from them. They pulled out in front of this dump truck. They were hit by the dump truck in the side, and the truck was forced off the road, hit a tree, and the driver was killed. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith burnt to death in their very own front yard. They know they died from the flames because they were still screaming. Witnesses said they were screaming as the car burned. So they were alive from the impact, but they succumbed to the fire. A horrible story. Very true, but a horribly tragic story. So here's why I share that with you. Not to tell you sad stories for an hour, not at all. But I want to remind you, were they on a familiar road? The answer is yes, of course they were. Was it a shorter distance? Indeed it was. It was a less traveled road. It was during the daytime. There was no such thing as rush hour traffic. And it was a beautiful Saturday morning. So the moral of the story is what? Just what I said a moment ago, that these are great tips to extend a safe driver's safe driving career, but there may still come a point in time where these tips are no longer good. They have served their life, they have served the older driver very well, but they've expired. And it's time again to simply give up driving or retire from driving. But I promise you no more stories like that. why might a family member be reluctant to talk to mom or dad about giving up driving? And again, I so wish that we were in an open forum here where we could talk, but we can't because of the nature of the COVID. Here are some potential reasons. It's an unnerving and uncomfortable conversation. You know, all family dynamics are different. I've met with hundreds, literally, of families over the driving issue and have found that no two families see things the exact same way. They're like fingerprints. But for some families, for some adult children, it is very unnerving and uncomfortable to know that you've got to go to dad in this picture and suggest to him that he retire from driving. I did a talk one time to a group of adult children here in Ohio, and there was a lady in the front row. She was by herself, and I noticed right from the very get-go, before I even said the first word, that she was very distraught. She was very uneasy about what we were going to talk about. And later in the presentation, I noticed she's got tears coming down her cheeks, and it wasn't from the story I just told. And I could just tell that this was just eating her alive. So immediately when I was done with the talk, I went straight to her. I didn't want to lose her. I didn't want to lose the opportunity to try to make things better for her. And she says this, she says, my mom and I live in the same town, just a few minutes apart, and my mom shouldn't be driving. And I know that, especially know that after hearing what this presentation offered me. But I know that I'm the only child, and it's up to me to tell her that, but I can't bring myself to it. She said so many times, I've driven to mom's house after work, determined that tonight is the night I'm going to tell mom that I don't think she should be driving any longer. She said, and I get there and I panic. I just freeze up. I can't make the words come out of my mouth. And now this poor gal is crying, no more just tears. She's standing there crying. And there's no doubt in my mind she's lost many nights of sleep over this. So it's an example of how, for some folks, it can be an extremely unnerving and uncomfortable conversation. Now, you turn that around, and there are families that are very blunt with each other, and they simply say, Mom, it's time to quit driving. Give me your keys. So again, no two families are the same for sure. As an adult child, you might want to avoid conflict or hurting mom or dad's feelings. You might be concerned that talking to mom about driving is just going to make either our relationship or the driving situation even worse. You don't want to challenge or disrespect your parent. For me, my father came out of high school, joined the United States Army. He's 85 now. Got out of the Army, did 4 years in the Army, got out of the Army, and then became an Ohio State trooper, coincidentally. But I was never brought up in an environment where I went around telling my mom and dad what they were and weren't able to do or what they should do. And to this day, my father being 85 years old, that hasn't changed. I'm still not in a position with our family dynamics to tell my dad that anything, to be honest with you. I'm very fortunate. My father, I jokingly say, already knows everything anyhow. But you get the point. You might be, as an attendee on this webinar today, I would like to ask the audience, how many of you have worked today? And probably the lion's share of you. And that's exactly right. And if you talk to mom about giving up driving and she agrees with that, then you may very well be the person that's delegated to get her to the places she wants to get to. You're the only person. And you might, for that reason, you might postpone this conversation for another week, another month. Not that your mom isn't the most important person in the world to you, she likely is. But you've got to, and you all know this, but you've got to blend that with your obligations at work, your livelihood, your family, and all the other things that are happening in your life. So it's another reason to kick the can down the road, so to speak, on having this conversation. And certainly we could talk about this for hours. So there are many, many bullet points, if you want to call them that we could talk about. But the last one here, denial that your mom or your father's disease, which oftentimes is dementia or Alzheimer's, is actually getting worse. And again, for any of these reasons, we find ourselves reluctant to have that talk with Dad today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Maybe after I'm done with this project at work, maybe in 2 years when my son or my daughter starts to drive so that he or she can help take Dad to the places he wants to get to. And of course, you know that oftentimes something happens in that interim period. What are some warning signs of diminished driving skills? And again, we could list 1,000 things here, I'm sure. But some of the more common ones are more frequent close calls or dents or scrapes on the car, mailboxes, garage doors, curbs. When I go to an senior living community to do one of our 2.5-hour sessions with an older driver, and I'll mention that later in our presentation here. But the first thing I do is, well, when I park my car in their parking lot and I'm walking to the main entrance, I admire how many cars in the parking lots outside rear view mirrors are dangling by wires, right? We've all seen that. And always when I ask an older driver, I noticed on your car, the mirrors were hanging by wires. Never yet have I had one say, yeah, I bumped into this or I bumped into that. It's always, I don't know how that happened. It's I get a tiny bit of enjoyment out of that. But it's very common, and you've all seen that. And you may have a loved one whose car is all dinged up. More conflict on the road, like others, people honking at them or frustrated with them for some reason. And nowadays, we've got the whole road rage thing going on. You know, I see stories on the internet, I watch them closely, where an older drivers, they are now becoming victims of road rage. There was a case here outside of Cleveland, Ohio, where an older driver was driving too slow, long story short. And the person behind him, a younger man, gentleman, didn't like it. So they started the horn war with each other. Next thing you know, the older gentleman pulls over, wanting this kid to just go, you know, be on your way. And the kid stops and gets out a ball bat and starts bashing this person's car, destroyed it. And so that's something now that we have to be concerned about. The next bullet point is just as important as the one we just talked about, being oblivious to the frustration of other drivers. When we sit down and meet with an older driver as part of our self-assessment session, these are two of the questions we ask. Mr. Smith, do you notice more conflict on the road? Do people seem to be honking at you more than they used to be? And quite honestly, an answer of yes, I do notice that is not necessarily bad, because that's what we do now as a society, right? We honk our horns at everybody. We're in a hurry, especially now with the COVID thing. Everybody's grumpy. We're very quick to do that. It used to be you only heard, well, I probably shouldn't say this. I'm sure some of you are from New York City, but it used to be that was where you heard horns honking. Now it's everywhere. But does the older driver have some idea of why they were being honked at? That's an important question. A driver that says, yes, I know, it happened to me just the other day. I was on Main Street and I was going to a new doctor. I had the address. I knew it was one of the next couple of driveways, but I wasn't sure which one. So I turned my signal on, turned out it wasn't that driveway. So I turned my signal back off, drove down, you get the point. And he said the people behind him were aggravated with him and blowing their horns. That's okay. That makes some amount of sense, doesn't it? Who hasn't that happened to? By the way, I get honked at all the time anymore. But anyhow, I did one of these sessions with an older lady, 86 years old. And she really shouldn't continue driving, and hopefully she didn't. But anyhow, I asked her these questions, these two questions, number 2 and 3 here. And she says, why, yes, Mr. Gurwell, I notice everybody honking at me. But I told you, it's because I'm 86 years old. I've lived in this community all my life and everybody knows me. And when we're driving, they honk as a way to say hello. And here's the funny part, is if that wasn't enough humor for the day, here's what she says. More often than not, I don't even know them, but they all know me and they're tooting to say hello. Which turned out, I gave her the benefit of the doubt at the time, but that turned out not to be why they were honking at her. Reluctance from friends or relatives to have to ride in a car with this person. How many of you have told your children, no more riding with grandpa? Grandpa's got no business driving. I don't want you to go in the, he's not going to pick you up from school anymore. I don't think it's safe. And that certainly is a warning sign. Or getting lost more often. Here's a deal breaker. If you've got a loved one who is getting lost in what has always been familiar territory, they should no longer be driving. So often we overlook the important role that memory plays in older driver safety. We worry about, well, dad seems to see okay, he can still hear, his reflexes are okay, he still plays softball, so we think he's got a little bit of strength and flexibility, and he doesn't take that many medications. His memory is bad, but how is that a big deal? I'm often asked that question. And so I want to take just a minute and talk about it. Here's the headline, not an article, the headline in the Washington Post back in 2011. Elderly couple found frozen to death after what? Getting lost. They were driving, this is Mr. and Mrs. Fresh. This is really them in another fuzzy picture because it's, to my knowledge, it's the only one that exists. It was taken by helicopter. And what happened was Mr. and Mrs. Fresh were going to their daughter's house, who lived 20 some miles away, but it was a trip they'd made for years. So it was on their children's approved list of places mom and dad could drive to because they were so comfortable with it, so familiar with the route. So he was celebrating his birthday on Sunday. And the family, the daughter and the rest of the children had set up a party. Mom and dad, come here Sunday and we're going to have a birthday party for dad. So mom and dad got confused. They went on the Friday before. So they showed up a couple days early. And of course, the adult daughter says, you know, I'm happy that you're here, but why are you here? Well, we're here for my party. No, Dad, your birthday is on Sunday and the party is on Sunday. So they played some board games and they ate lunch and sent mom and dad back home with the instructions to come back in a couple of days for the actual party. They didn't find him until Tuesday afternoon, frozen to death in this field. And what they speculate happened was they got lost driving back home. It got to be dark. Again, this is all what they pieced together. Nobody knows for sure, but they think it got dark and they were lost, as I said, and they found an opening in a farm fence. And for whatever reason, they turned into that opening. Who knows if they thought it was a road or what exactly was going through their mind. And they went up over it was hilly. It wasn't mountainous. It was hilly in northeast Pennsylvania. Shippensburg area, if anybody is from there. And they got into this field and they got down in a little knoll and they got stuck. So they speculate that she went looking for help. So now it's dark. They're stuck in this farm field and lost. And she went looking for help and didn't return. And he then, after who knows how long, went looking for her. And he too collapsed. And as it says, they were found frozen to death in the farm field on Tuesday morning. They only found him by helicopter. Everybody was looking for him, but you couldn't see him because they were down in this little knoll. Frozen to death about 30 yards apart from each other. And now what caused this? What ended their lives? It was because they continued to drive with a slipping memory, a diminishment in their memory. They may physically have been the absolute best drivers there were in all of Pennsylvania, but their memory was failing them. And that's what led to their death. And sadly, I can tell you story after story after story of similar cases where memory is what led to an older person's demise. So memory, again, I want to reiterate, if your mom or dad is getting lost in what has always been familiar territory for them, it is time for them to retire from driving. Okay, what are some reasons that seniors themselves might be reluctant to give up driving? Well, we all know, but we'll talk about these 3 points. A senior may become that believe that he or she would become a burden to others. How many of us have a parent? For me personally, this was my mom. Sadly, she died a couple years ago. But she would never dream of picking up the phone and calling one of us kids and saying, can you run me to the store? Can you run me to the hairdresser? That was a big thing with my mom. She would never do it because she wouldn't want to put us out, so to speak. She didn't want to be a burden to anybody. It wouldn't have been a burden. We've all told her 10,000 times, Mom, call when you need to go somewhere. But she just wouldn't. She was of that disposition. Now, how many of you have a loved one the same way? Losing the right to drive can add to a previous loss, such as the loss of a spouse, friend, or your health. Imagine this gentleman here's wife of 60 years passed away a month ago, and now his kids, his adult children, are on their way over to get his car and his keys from him. Wouldn't it seem like the end of the world to this poor fellow? Of course it would. And fewer social opportunities. That's the biggest one. We don't want to give up our driver's license because we'll lose our independence. I did one of these sessions. No, let me correct myself. The very first self-assessment, that's what we call this session, I did with an older driver was with Evelyn, who also was 86 years old. And again, it was the very first one I ever did. It was just me doing them here in Cleveland, Ohio, as a way to supplement my retirement and kind of give back to the community. And because, like I said, I knew there was a problem with what we do with older drivers that shouldn't be driving. So I developed this program. I went and met with Evelyn, my very first customer. I'm introduced to her by her adult daughter. Evelyn lived in an independent living community. And so the daughter says, Mom, this is Matt. Matt, this is Evelyn, my mom. And I went to shake her hand. This was prior COVID when you could do that. And Evelyn recoiled. She said, and she was dead serious. She said, I'm not shaking your hand. You're here to take my car and my keys from me. I don't like you. And she meant that. So that was kind of set the tone for our session. So Evelyn and I, we like to do these sessions in the absence of a family. So her and I went into a conference room and we spent the next 2 to 3 hours working through our way through this program. And at the end, I suggested to Evelyn that I didn't think she should be driving any longer. And the litmus test we use, the criteria we base that on is this person at an elevated risk for a future traffic accident? They either are or not. So you don't really pass or fail our session, but you are provided with that guidance. Look, I think, Evelyn, I think you're at an elevated risk for a future traffic crash because of this, that, and the other thing. But anyhow, so I tell Evelyn that, and her and I are sitting in the room together, and she's crying. She didn't want to hear this, and I'm about ready to cry. It's my first session ever, and I'm thinking, man, I've got to do some tweaking on how this ends. So anyhow, we ended the session and we went out and talked to the daughter, and they went about their way. Well, a month later, Evelyn calls me, and I knew who it was. Like I said, I was dear to her because she was my first customer ever, and she's still crying. I said, Evelyn, my goodness, what's the matter? I was ready to jump in the car and go get her and take her wherever she needed to go. She said, I just want to tell you, I'm busier now than I ever have been in my life. She said, as it turned out, giving up driving at this point in my life was the best thing that could have happened to me. She said, other than the recent passing of my husband, this is the worst thing I've ever had to face. But again, it turned out to be the best thing, because when my neighbors, my friends, my family, my church family, all heard that I was no longer driving. They've come out of the woodwork, so to speak, to help me, to get me to the places I want to get to. I still get to go to my meetings, my club, get to go to my church programs and services and all of those things. And again, just to reiterate, she said it was the best thing that could have happened to me. So the reason I share that with you is to show you that we think, and I too had always thought the same thing, that giving up driving means a loss of independence, but it does not have to be that way. That's our default response. But I think, in my opinion, we need to change the paradigm. We need to reconsider how we look at that. When I go and talk to older adults, I should say, about driving. So most of them are still drivers, but some of them are not. And I always ask this question, and I've always had great success with it. It hasn't failed me yet. But I ask the older people in the room, who in here has never driven? And always, because these are done at a senior living community of some sort, oftentimes. So they attend all the classes. But anyhow, there's always one or two, three people that will raise their hand that they've never had a driver's license in their life. And I know typically they're females. And I know for me, neither one of my grandmothers ever drove, not a single mile. So it's not uncommon to have people raise their hand and say, yes, I never had a driver's license and I never drove. So I'll pick one of them at random and ask them, ma'am, do you think you've missed out in social opportunities over the course of your life because you never drove? And they say the exact same thing every single time. Absolutely not. And it's more proof in the pudding that we need to change how we think about this. Just because you no longer drive doesn't mean that you're going to lose your independence. Remember the story of Evelyn, who for her, it turned out to be an absolute blessing. She has since passed away, sadly. And now that was before Uber and Lyft and other such services. Now, I heard a commercial on the radio, and I've heard this before, I guess, but I heard it again just today, where you can actually rent your car out, or, as you know, provide driving services for people. It was a story about ancillary income sources. You can be a driver in your local community, kind of like Uber, but kind of not, kind of more a private hire version of Uber. But anyhow, nowadays, there are so many options available to older adults. Now, I'm not saying that's everywhere across the country. We need to do a lot more work on that still, but it's a lot better than it was just 5-10 years ago. It used to be for any of us to call for an Uber ride, you had to have two things. You had to have a smartphone and you had to have the Uber app on your smartphone. Many of these folks don't want a smartphone, and if they do get stuck with one, they certainly don't want something called an Uber app. My dad's that way. He refuses. He'll never have a smartphone. Kind of funny. Anytime something comes up, any issue in the country, he always blurts out, "There must be an app for that." But anyhow, so he's determined he'll never have one. And I think he's probably not alone in that thinking. But so anyhow, for this gentleman to call for an Uber ride, it wouldn't be available to him. Well, they've developed this platform, this software program called Go Grandparent. And their website is gograndparent.com. And it allows this older driver to call for an Uber ride from the old style flip phone. So like my father, he does have that. He does have a cell phone. It's just not a smartphone. So Uber realized we're missing out on a tremendous amount of business because many older adults don't drive anymore, but they can't use our services. They can't call for an Uber ride because they don't have the app or a phone to put it on. So just know that it's a resource available to you. It's a very nice resource, gograndparent.com. Depending on how it's set up, you can tell it to send me text every time you pick up dad. So if this driver shows up, it would still be an Uber driver. He would show up, pick up dad to take him to Walmart, but you would get a text saying, we just picked up dad and we're taking him to Walmart. When they get to Walmart, you get another text. We just dropped your father off at Walmart. He says for us to come back in 45 minutes. So 45 minutes later, you get the point. But they keep you in the loop on what they're doing with your loved one, which is nice. If not handled properly, and what I'm talking about is this conversation with mom or dad, forcing an older driver to give up driving can trigger depression and isolation, which in turn can eventually cause a decline in their physical health, which in turn can what? It can lead to their death. That's how important it is to have these conversations in an appropriate manner. Whatever that happens to be for your family. Again, all family dynamics are different. There's no two alike. But it's important to be compassionate and understanding the difficulty of such a transition. When and how should the conversation start? First tip I can offer you, don't wait until something happens. First of all, it could be something serious, and then it's too late for sure. But even if you're sitting back thinking the next time mom bumps into this, or the next time mom gets stopped by the police, we're going to use that as an opportunity to step in and talk to her about this might be a good time to give up driving. Here's why I say that. When you wait like that until something happens, say mom runs a stop sign and gets a ticket by the police or gets a warning, whatever. And she comes home and she says, oh, she's crying. I got stopped by the police and they weren't real nice to me. And they told me I ran a stop sign and I don't think I did. And you start saying, mom, look, we need to talk about your driving anyhow. This is a perfect opportunity. Mom is not going to see that as the perfect opportunity. Here's what she's going to say. What are you, crazy? I've been driving for sometimes 70 years. I've never been stopped by the police. I've never had an accident. And now I roll through a stop sign, supposedly, which I don't even think I did. And you're telling me you think I shouldn't drive any longer? And you can envision this person telling you that I remember when you were learning to drive, you had 3 accidents in 1 year. I've not had that many in 60 or 70 years of driving. And I remember when you got 2 traffic citations the same day. This is my first one after 50, 60, 70 years of driving. And now you're telling me that you don't think I should drive any longer? It's not going to go well. Here is another story. I mentioned earlier, I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. So I get a phone call from a family up in the Vermont, New Hampshire area of the country, a gentleman, an adult child. And he says, my parents live in Dunedin, Florida. And they only drive on Sundays, typical case. They leave home, they drive to church, they drive to their favorite restaurant, eat lunch, and then they drive back home and they park the car basically until next Sunday. And here's what the son tells me. Sunday, because this was on Tuesday, he calls me on Tuesday. On Sunday past, they did what I said. They left home, they went to church, they went to their favorite restaurant. As he was parking, dad was parking, he got the brake and the gas pedal confused, accelerated up over the parking curb, up over the sidewalk, and through into and halfway through this crowded restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. 9 people, he said, were sent to the hospital. 2 we don't think are going to survive the crash. This, by the way, is not a picture of that accident. This is simply a picture of a car that drove into a building, but certainly representative of what we're talking about. So the son says, look, we know it's after the fact. We know the damage is already done. But they, as adult children, were worried about losing their inheritance. And he told me that. We want to be able to show when this goes to civil trial, because it will undoubtedly, everybody's going to sue us. We want to be able to show that as adult children, once we thought there was a problem, which was pretty easy to identify in this case, once we realized there was a problem, we took action. So they wanted me to go down to Dunedin, Florida, which is outside of Tampa, and do one of these sessions with their dad. And so I did. I went down, I think, Friday of that very same week. The next Sunday hadn't even come yet. And so we're going through this session, and he's very agitated. He's mad at me. He's mad at his wife for letting him have this accident. He's mad at his kids for all the ruckus they're causing. He's mad at the people that were hurt. He argued that none of them were really hurt. They just want to sue me. So they went to the hospital for that reason. He's mad at this. He's mad. He blamed it on his shoes. Ultimately, it was the fault of his new shoes. But anyhow, halfway through this session, he gets up from the table and he walks me to the picture window out in the living room. And he lived in a residential street, of course. And he says, "See all those cars going by?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "How many of those people do you think have had more than one accident?" I said, "I'll bet you a lot of them." And then he said, "How many accidents have you had?" And I'm thinking, oh, brother, he got me now. Because I'm counting, I'm going through my mind, counting all the accidents I've had as a trooper, mostly. But anyhow, he's like I said, you had to see him. He was extremely irritated. But he says, "That's exactly my point. You're half my age and have had twice as many accidents as I have. Who in the world do you think you are, or anybody else, to tell me that it might be time for me to give up driving? If I do the exact same thing next Sunday, I'm still a better driver than what you are and all of these people driving up and down the street." And he was convinced of that. And there was no way I or anybody else was going to get over that hurdle. Again, this was his first accident in all of these years, and he was going to have none of it that he shouldn't be driving. And so that's why I know, regardless of where your mother or father are in the safe driving continuum, I encourage you to start those discussions today. Don't wait for a triggering event. It is important to cite examples. For me, I have two boys. If they come here someday, maybe today still, and they say, "Dad, we don't think you should be driving any longer," and they turn around and leave, all I'm going to do is kick them in the shins, saying, "What are you, crazy?" But if they provide some good evidence, some good support material, some good reasoning behind why they think that, and provide me with examples of things I've done wrong with my driving, then that's a different story. I did one of these sessions with an older gentleman, of course, here in a very rich part of Cleveland, Ohio, suburb. There are rich parts, suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, believe it or not. And this gentleman, long story short, because I'm telling too many tales, but we went out to go for a ride together. It was something we did back then before liability got to be such an issue. We don't get in the car with the person anymore. But back then we did, years ago. And his driving was horrible. He's for me, I've done 400 and some of these sessions. He's only one of two people ever that I've asked to stop during our driving exercise, and so we can switch drivers and I can drive us back home. So when we did that, we switched drivers. One of the things he did, by the way, it was a day like this, like in the picture, and he had a Jaguar. It was spotless, of course. He was very wealthy, very well educated, very successful business person, retired now. Anyhow, we're in his Jaguar, he's driving, I'm the passenger, and he reaches down and turns on the windshield wipers. No reason for it. He didn't use the washer fluid. He didn't try to, and it was out. It wasn't raining. Nothing had landed on our windshield that needed cleared off. And we drive down the road for several miles with these on a Jaguar windshield wipers do something funny. They're like helicopter rotor blades coming at each other. But we drove down the road for several miles miles like that. He wasn't trying to turn them off. He purposely turned them on, and he was content with that. And so, but that was, I share that with you because it was indicative of his thought process. Things weren't working exactly right. And he'd done all sorts of things wrong in his driving. For example, we drove down the middle of the road. If cars were coming toward him, it was assumed that they would get over, they get hit. But anyhow, so we stopped, we pulled into a gas station, we switched drivers. Now I'm driving the fancy Jaguar back to the house. I got the wipers turned off, and there's a long silence. And he says to me, "Why the change? Why are you now driving and I'm the passenger?" And I told him, I said, "To be honest with you, thought you were going to kill us." And I went through this laundry list of things he had done wrong. And again, another long silence. This was a very successful retired business person, very intelligent. And he's taken all this in, and he says, well, he didn't remember the wiper incident, by the way, but he said, well, if even half of what you're saying is true, then I have no business driving. And as I continued to drive us home, he explained that my son, my adult son, and my wife have been on me for months, that my driving is horrible, they would say. You're going to hurt somebody, you're going to hurt yourself. But they never provided me with any specifics. And again, if what you're saying is true, then I should not drive any longer. And for him, that was the end of it. He was very satisfied with not driving any longer because he was presented with the facts and not just emotion, opinion, or speculation. Planning ahead for us as adult children is the key to helping your loved one maintain their independence. We've got to have a plan B in place. And when my kids come here and they say, "Hey, Dad, we don't think you should drive any longer," they need to offer up a suggestion on how I'm still going to be able to do the things I want to do. They need to have a plan. And for all of us, we need to have a plan for our loved ones so that they do maintain their independence. Dr. Waldinger, Robert Waldinger, a PhD at Harvard Medical School, did a study on loneliness, and I feel kind of bad. This doggone report was 500 some pages long, and I just took 2 words out of it. But he wrote that loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. And that's why it's so important to help your loved one maintain their independence through what can be one of life's most difficult transitions, and that is of a driving retirement. When we do these sessions with the older driver, I want to show you an exercise real quick. It's called drawing clocks and driving cars. The clock drawing test has been around for decades. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you simply ask the patient, which it oftentimes is, to draw a clock, put in the numbers, and then you tell them what time to draw to set the clock to. It's that simple. But again, it's been around for decades as a dementia or Alzheimer's screening tool. In 2002, this Dr. Freund in Virginia pieced together that it is also, as it says at the bottom, it says it best there, the clock drawing test shows a high level of accuracy in predicting driving simulator outcome. And since then, they've replicated this test many times, and in real life scenarios as well. So it is a very valid test. It's given by doctors not only here in the United States, but across the globe. And in her initial test, when she was piecing all of this together, she took 119 older adults, 60 or older, that still lived in private residences out in the community. So they weren't in senior living communities at all. They were active drivers, which she defined as they drive basically every day. And they had a valid driver's license, of course. So what they did was they brought these folks into this session. I think the this study actually took place in Detroit for whatever reason, but they bring them into this room, and they all have to do the clock drawing test. And then they ran them through driving simulators. And that's when they showed the positive correlation between your performance on the clock drawing test and your actual driving abilities, which is amazing to me. Here are a couple of very quick examples. They were asked to draw the time at 20 minutes past 8. You can see we don't have time to get into it, but there's a quarter of the clock is void. There's confusion with the number 11. Who knows if they corrected it or uncorrected it? And that's not how a clock shows 20 minutes past 8. So imagine that this is your loved one, and you said, Mom, you can only drive to certain places. If you want to go other places, you need to call me and I'll figure out how to get you there. I don't want you driving on unfamiliar roads. So she is doing that. She's good about it. So today she's going to one of those pre-approved places by you, and the police have the road blocked off for some reason. So now she's rerouted. How is the person that struggled to draw that clock going to react here? And the answer is it may not go well. Here's a second example. I have to speed my talking pace up. And these are all from that very initial study. Since then, we've been using this in our program with permission. And I can show you examples that are way wilder than what we're seeing in these 3 examples. But same thing, asked to draw the time at 20 minutes past 8. And here's what you get. Another big void in the between the 1 and the 12. And there's all sorts of things. We could talk for an hour about this, but also it's backwards. It's drawn backwards. I don't even think I could do that. My mind is not that sophisticated to be able to. It's like buttoning your shirt with your offhand. Have you ever tried that? It's like nearly impossible. Plus, this person wasn't able to even identify or make any attempt to identify the time. And now imagine, same thing. This person is detoured or they get lost and they find themselves in this busy intersection. How is the person that drew the clock backwards going to maneuver or manipulate their vehicle safely through this intersection? I see bicyclists, I see pedestrians, I see stoplights, I see turn lanes, I see through lanes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer again is it may not go well. This is my favorite from this particular study. This person was asked to draw the time at 20 minutes past 8. And you can see there's no 7s in either line. There's 2 12s in the bottom, and it's not even representative of a clock. And how is that person going to react when they come over this grade? They see something big and yellow on the left, and they see something moving on the right. I can tell you from my experience as an Ohio State trooper that this is what happens. I've had to go to Mr. Smith's work at 8 o'clock in the morning, find out what conference room he's in for their morning meeting, bang on the door, ask who Mr. Smith is, raises his hand. I say, can you come here for a minute? You might as well bring your briefcase because you're probably not going to be coming back anytime soon. Take him down the hall and explain to him, Mr. Smith, your wife, your son, and your daughter were just run over and killed as they stood waiting on the school bus. And it's reasons like that that this program was developed in the first place. It's meant to save lives. We have what I referred to this session several times. It's called a self-assessment session. We have 55 or so representatives from Senior Care Authority across the United States that are trained to do this program. So no matter where you're at geographically in the country, hopefully we've got somebody that can help you if you're interested in talking more about a session for your loved one, or if you are the loved one. We have older drivers call us and actually schedule this session for themselves. So if you'd like to learn more about it, I'll show you the website address here, but also I'll provide you with my phone number. Call me and I'll do my absolute best to try to connect you with a local Senior Care Authority owner. At most, a retirement from driving might mean a loss of convenience, but it should never mean a loss of independence. An older adult should not be placed under house arrest just because they made the right decision to give up driving. Why in the world would we punish that person by taking away their independence? It shouldn't happen that way. And I want to remind you that the very name of this program is Beyond Driving with Dignity. We always put the word dignity in italics because it is such an important component of our program. Anybody can take this lady's keys and car from her, right? It's called a tow truck. We can do it from anywhere in the country. This program is not that. It's to help the older person make the right decisions about their driving future and still maintain their pride, their dignity, and their independence. That is it, everyone. Again, this is a program of Senior Care Authority. We are a residential placement service for older adults and also provide elder care consulting services. The website for the company itself is seniorcareauthority.com. More specifically, if you wanted to read more about this Beyond Driving with Dignity program, it's simply beyonddrivingwithdignity.com. And there is my name and email address and a toll-free number. So again, if you would like to talk more about this one-on-one session with an older driver in your family, please feel free to email me or call. Or if you'd like to schedule a talk for your group or organization, your workplace, whatever, just exactly as we've done here this afternoon, feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect you with our local representative. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Great presentation, Matt. In fact, Evelyn said this is a great webinar, a lot of information, and the stories really help. So certainly very impactful, everything that you've said. And I think also there's a lot of information here that people are not aware of or have not been aware of until literally the past hour. With what you've passed along, the go-go grandparent, obviously an option there, Uber, an option there, these sessions. And I know that that's really sending off alarms in everybody that I didn't even know this existed, and they're taking notes now. So a quick question on that end.
Yes.
And I think this is a good one, and it's one that I think will answer a question for many people. Where do we find out about local session options? I mean, you can't be cloned 1,000 times over. So how can they get somebody like you to do the driving and to do that assessment?
On our website, seniorcareauthority.com, we've got a map. There's a phrase that says contact your local representative or find a representative. And so you can do that, or you can simply reach out to me and I'll make that connection for you.
Perfect. Okay. So I hope that answers that question. I know everybody was curious about that. I was too, when we spoke last week about this same topic. Another question here from Debbie: should I tell others, and when she says others, she means family and friends, about my concerns about the unsafe driver?
Yes, that's the best way to start. I've always said it should never be one person that bears the burden of talking to mom or dad about the driving issue. It needs to be all of the children. It needs to be the doctor. It needs to be your dad's favorite nurse. It needs to be somebody from the church or religious organization, all of them independently putting the bug in dad's ear that maybe you should rethink this driving thing. But yes, by all means, all of the children have to be singing from the same sheet of music when they talk to mom about giving up driving. If they don't, mom's going to sense that weakness. She's going to go straight to it, and that's what she's going to that's going to be her argument. Well, you two kids are just after me for whatever reason, but daughter Jane says I'm fine to drive. And so your question was very good, but everybody needs to get together and present a common front.
Perfect. Lisa asks, if we don't use your self-assessment program, what kind of objective exam is recommended for assessment? Neurological? What does a doctor look for?
Good question. Well, one of the problems nationally is doctors don't always, and I'm sure there's some of our folks on this webinar that can attest to this, but doctors don't always want to become involved in a driving conversation. And there's actually many reasons for that. Some of them even good reasons from their profession. But some doctors on the other side of the coin are very proactive and will gladly talk to mom about her driving. But in the event that we don't have any but one in your particular area, typically hospitals have run a driving assessment program out of their OT or PT departments. So you can just Google driving assessments in Tampa, Florida, and see what comes up, and at least get started. And the same thing, Melissa, I'm sorry, as before. If any of your listeners want to find something locally and we don't have anybody that can help them, I'm delighted if they just reach out to me, I'll help connect them with whatever resources would be beneficial to them.
Yeah, I know our viewers love hearing that. Thank you so much for that. We've got another question here. And as we're winding the webinar down, if you have something you want to ask Matt, I know he's given out his phone number and his email to make himself available. But if you do want to ask a question here, now is the time to get that question in. This question here from Evelyn, who appreciates the webinar. She said, I was sent a form from TDHS from my mother's doctor to send in for her to stop driving. Have you seen this type of form?
Yes. Again, I talked about doctors not always wanting to be involved in the driving issue, but in a bigger picture, one of the problems across the country is every state sets their own rules for retesting older adults. So what is the law and the procedure in here where I'm at in Ohio versus Florida is probably different. But most states have a reporting mechanism where a doctor, law enforcement, or a court can report an unsafe driver. And then typically what will happen is they'll notify that older driver that they need to come in and retake their driving test. In many states, not all of them, but a family member can also report an unsafe older driver. Now, one of the problems with that is in most states, it has to be authored. In other words, it can't be anonymous. I can't send a letter in about my mom's driving and not sign it. They're just going to throw it away. So it has to be authored, and that can sometimes cause some family issues as well. But certainly, and I believe in all the states, there is a reporting procedure in place.
Good to know. And then the last question here looks like it's from Ellen, and this is state specific. Is there anything from the DMV or MVA that is a screening option in Maryland? And if you don't know that, how could she find this information out?
You know, Maryland, I don't know. Specifically, I don't know. I can tell you Maryland has a very aggressive older driver safety program. I would suggest going to, I'm not sure what they call it in Maryland, if it's the Department of Motor Vehicles or Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and it's different. That's another thing. They even call it different things. But if you go to their website, I think Ellen will be pleasantly surprised with the resources available there.
Perfect.
And that's true regardless of what state you're in, but I think it's especially true in Maryland.
Gotcha. One more question, and I think this may also help some people who maybe saw their mom or dad in the example you gave of the gentleman who said, if I do the same thing next Sunday, I'm still a better driver than you are. How do you crack that nut, if you will? How do you get through to somebody who is very stubborn on that end?
You won't crack that nut. That's the problem. That's why it's mentioned here. But what you can do is prevent the need to crack that nut. And that is by doing what I said and talking to mom or dad as soon as tonight. Even if mom is still a good driver, say, Mom, you're still a great driver. I hope you remain that way forever. But things could start to slip. And just engage her in some conversation. Use a news event. If somebody from your local community went to get a loaf of bread down the street and they found them 3 days later in Boise, Idaho, use that as an opportunity to talk to mom. Mom, you see what happened here? This person could have been killed. They could have become a victim of crime. They could have been in a bad accident, being on unfamiliar territory. A lot of times, let me throw this in very quickly, use a wrong way drivers on the interstate. If it's an older driver, it's because they were lost. So older drivers have a tendency to find themselves going the wrong way on the interstate of all places because they're confused, they're scared. But anyhow, to answer her question, please start today talking to mom about driving so that you don't have to wait until there is some triggering event. You've already greased those conversation skids, so to speak.
Yeah, and thank you for really hammering the message home that, hey, use examples, don't, as you said, don't wait until there's an emergency or something happens. It's not the time to have that conversation. And Lisa, sliding in to home plate here with a comment, she said, my husband's aunt decided years beforehand that she would stop driving at age 85, which she did, even though she was probably still fine to do so. And she says that's pretty impressive. And I think we could, Yeah, we could all use more people like her husband's aunt, certainly making a great decision there.
And Melissa, on that note, those are the heroes amongst us. The people that my mom was the same way. She just knew I have no business driving this heavy car down the road. I'm going to run over somebody. And she was right. But she decided that on her own. We have, and again, those are the unsung heroes amongst us. They go quietly. They just do the right thing. And all of us think that my mom will do the right thing. My mom has always done the right thing. The problem is dementia and Alzheimer's skews their ability to think rationally. And they don't, or they get to a point where they're not making rational decisions. They have otherwise made perfect decisions all their life. And always were concerned about the best interest of someone else and never wanting to hurt anybody. But dementia again can taint that ability some. But we have what we call a retired driver trophy that is 11 inches tall, and it says, "Congratulations, Mary Smith, on 65 years of safe driving." And that's not appropriate for anybody. If I sent one to this person, he may throw it in the fireplace. Who knows? But I went to a funeral one time here in Cleveland, Ohio. And you know how you go to the viewing or the visitation the day before typically, and they might have a table or two set up with dad's favorite things, his golf clubs, his Ohio State sweatshirt, and all sorts of things like that. Don't you know there was a retired driver trophy on his table? And the family said that was such an important thing for him. He was proud of that he gave up driving on his own. So for anybody, if you're interested in that, let me know that as well. They're very inexpensive, but they're personalized with that person's information because they should be, as you read there, they should be commended for that.
I agree. And I think that that is actually a very good note to end this very informative webinar on. Matt, excellent tips today. And I think that the conversation starters, the tips that you gave today are really going to help make this discussion a lot easier for many people. And for that, we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. And for those of you joining us, a couple of you have already asked, yes, this will be available starting tomorrow. All of you who joined us today will receive a link to this webinar tomorrow to share with your friends and family. You can also catch a replay of the webinar with Matt at www.seniorlivinglive.com. And while you're there, feel free to check out the rest of our content all about senior living. As always, we appreciate you watching Senior Living Live. Thank you for being with us today. Have a great day, everybody.